When I was little, my father was famous. He was the greatest samurai in the empire. He cut off the heads of 131 lords. He was the greatest samurai in the empire. And he took me with him.
Hey everybody, I thought I'd do another video where I answer questions that have been asked on my comment threads. Some of these have been sitting around for a while others are more recent. The reason I do these videos is because flat earthers, for the most part, don't want to answer questions about their fantasy world, but they just want to ask and attack the globe model. Now this is me showing that I'm willing to answer questions. Also, flat earthers keep saying that there are holes in the globe model, but the questions they have always end up showing that the hole is in their understanding, not the model. So I want to show that as well. The first question I have is a new one, and just from today, and I'm addressing it because I knew it was going to be special. The user, Bible is Flat Earth, stated, "I got 100 questions globe fools are afraid to answer." To which I replied, "Give me one and I'll answer it in my next video. I'm recording one today. Just one, not 5, not a novel with a moral quandary within it. One question about the Earth being a globe. Go." Pretty straightforward, right? And just to show the type of mentality that comes from the biblical flat Earth side, this is what was posted in reply. 5 minutes of reading, a dozen biblical links, a half dozen or more questions about God's motives, and restrictions on what is acceptable as an answer. Thanks, Bible is Flat Earth, for this excellent example of flat Earth thinking. Now, on to the real questions. If the Earth is 93 whatever billion miles away, why is the equator warmer than the North Pole? Isn't the North Pole closer to the sun? Well, first off, it's millions of miles away, not billions. Secondly, no, the North Pole is not closer to the sun than the equator. I know some of you might be thinking that since the Earth is tilted toward the sun part of the year, that the North Pole is closer. But as you can see here, even at its maximum tilt during the solstice, the North Pole is farther from the sun than the equator. But let's be honest, over 93 million miles, 1,000 miles or two is negligible. They're essentially the same distance away, which leads to a connected question. If the sun is 93 million miles away from the Earth, why are some areas of Earth colder than others? At that distance, wouldn't the Earth's temperature be more uniform? This has to do with the angle of incidence of the sun's radiation, heat, on the surface of the Earth. The part of the Earth that has a high angle throughout the year, the area between the tropic lines, has a higher average temperature, as it is getting more heat energy per area than the locations with a lower angle of incidence. Picture a flashlight beam shining directly down on a surface, and you have this nice circle, which is 100% of the light and is nice and bright. Now picture tilting that surface at an angle. That circle has now stretched out to an oblong shape, and the same amount of light, energy, is now spread over a larger area, and that area is not as bright. We are all familiar with this effect in our daily lives, and I do mean daily. Instead of looking at the Earth from this perspective, let's look at it from the pole, in this case, the South Pole. This is east and this is west. For these people here, the sun is coming up. It's at a very low angle and the temperature is low. When they get here, the sun is at a high angle in the sky and high impact. And here, near the sunset, the sun is low again and its impact is diminished. This principle here translates directly to the temperature differences on different parts of the Earth. You just have to reorient yourself. Of course, there are the added aspects of light going through the atmosphere and the accumulated impact of climate, but I'm just looking at the impact of the sun's rays in this case. This ties a bit to the next question, which is, if the Earth is on an elliptical orbit around the sun, why doesn't the entire planet experience winter at the same time, like when the Earth is furthest away from the sun? Well, it comes down to the fact that the impact of the angle of incidence of the sun's rays is more influential than the 3% difference in the distance in the extremes of the Earth's orbit. And connected to that winter question, if the Earth is in an elliptical orbit around the sun, why don't we have winter twice a year? Well, I know it seems like a smart-ass answer, but I can't really avoid it in this case. We do have winter twice a year. We, as a planet, have 2 winters. But again, it's not connected to the distance from the sun, but the angle towards the sun. Part of the year, the northern hemisphere has a lower overall angle of incidence with the sun and experiences winter. 6 months later, the southern hemisphere experiences their winter. Next question. Given the atmosphere is a fluid, and tall buildings are solid, and that on the equator the Earth is supposed to be moving at approximately 1,000 miles per hour, why do we not experience a vacuum on the west side of these buildings? And that's because the air at the equator is moving at the same rate, give or take a few miles per hour. It seems that when people think about this, they think of everything being still and the Earth just revved up to 1,000 miles per hour all of a sudden. But that's not how the planet evolved. That's not what's going on. Atmosphere came after the planet formed, and if gas is leached out through the land masses, they already have the velocity of the system as part of their motion. And then there are these 3 questions which are related. If the Earth is round, why don't ships pick up speed when they're going north to south, downhill? If the Earth is round, why don't the oceans run off of it? I would like you to explain how water, which seeks its own level, can be spread around a sphere evenly. Why doesn't it all collect at the bottom of the sphere? All 3 of these come down to not understanding what the definition of down is, and an inability to separate from their own point of view and think 3-dimensionally. They know that for them that this is up and this is down. They look at a map and they think north is up and south is down. And they hold a ball or a globe and they say this is up and this is down. When down is toward the dominant source of gravity, in this case, the center of the Earth. So when we're looking at the Earth from the outside of the Earth, down is in toward the middle. And that's difficult for some to picture. Let me try something. This little ball of clay has a ferrofluid being poured over it. And because it's just clay, the gravity of the Earth is pulling all but the slightest bit of it off of the clay ball. Now, this is a similar ball of clay, but I've put some neodymium magnets in the center. Those magnets are acting like a local gravitational force for this ball of clay, attracting the ferrofluid. So magnetic down is toward the center of the clay. The fluid is conforming to the outside of the ball because a force is pulling it inward. This is water finding its level with all the forces that are acting on it. This is water being pulled by an invisible force into a ball. This is how water conforms to the surface of the Earth. Next question. Why can't we bring 2 spheres? One of them's mass compared to the other is just like the Earth's mass compared to the moon, and see the smaller object move around it. Now, in case some of you don't catch exactly what's being asked, the Earth is about 81 times the mass of the moon. So why can't we get 2 spheres, say an 81 kilogram one and a 1 kilogram one, and put them together like the Earth and the moon, and put the smaller one in orbit around the larger one? The issue with that is how gravitational force actually relates to mass. Here's the formula. The 2 influential factors are the masses of the objects involved and their distance apart. The more massive, the more gravity, and the more distant, the less gravity. And while the Earth and the Moon would be much farther apart than our scaled-down objects, my back-of-the-napkin estimate of some 20 million times farther away, making r squared a multiple with some 14 zeros after it, the mass of the Earth and Moon are so much greater that they are a factor with some 45 zeros after it, meaning the force between the 2 small objects is just way too small to be able to replicate an orbit. This leads to the answer of the next question. If gravity is a force strong enough to hold trillions of pounds of water to a spinning ball, then how come butterflies easily defy and fly freely? First, much like the previous question, the mass of a butterfly is incredibly small. There's not much force acting on it. But I also have to mention that it is neither free or easy for a butterfly to fly. It has to expend a lot of energy, and thus it has to consume a lot of energy in order to fly. Just because it looks elegant does not mean that it is easy. Now this is a big one. Could you show me, using the Pythagorean theorem between California and Maryland, how the sun is 90 million miles away? So, for example, if the sun is directly overhead at noon in California, a 90-degree angle. And this is a tough one, so I have to say, honestly, no, I can't. Mainly because every resource I have to get data rounds its values in one direction or another. The latitude and longitude of locations is rounded. The radius of the Earth is rounded. The distance between locations, the angle of the sun, all of these things are rounded off. And even as I calculate things, I round things off, which makes a margin of error for everything I do. But even with that rounding, I can calculate that the sun is not nearby. And on top of that, I can show that on a flat Earth, the sun's distance cannot be calculated. So our commenters suggested Maryland and California as examples. So I picked Baltimore, Maryland, and Mendocino, California, because they are at this almost exactly the same latitude. Again, almost, so I'm rounding off. According to current understanding, they are 47.1873 degrees apart at that latitude, and 2,500 miles apart distance-wise. Looking up solar noon for Baltimore, we find that at the exact same time the sun is directly overhead in Baltimore, the sun is at 47 degrees from peak, or 43 degrees up in Mendocino. The radius of the circle at that latitude is 3,063.63 miles. Putting in the angles we were given, we get a right triangle with a short side of a value of 2,247.42 miles. And because of the errors in rounding, we get lines that are beyond parallel. That makes the sun an infinite, impossible distance away. If we could tighten those values up to 19/100ths of a degree, we would have our 93 million miles. The errors of these values would have to be off by 13 degrees or more to get the sun under 10,000 miles, according to our known model. Now, given what we know, let's apply that to the flat Earth concept. Since we know the two cities are 2,500 miles apart, and the angle of the sun, we get a sun distance calculation of 2,331 miles away. And you flat earthers will say that, see, this fits the nearby sun. To that I say, hold on. There's a reason I say you can't calculate the sun's distance on a flat model. Because if you take another set of values comparing locations at a different distance, say Accra, Ghana, and Bogota, Colombia, as I did in my very first Flat Earth video, you get a sun distance of 1,458 miles. A difference of nearly 40%. So the measurements you get in the real world cannot be used to figure out the distance of the sun on a flat Earth. Which is why flat earthers refuse to make a definitive statement about the distance to the sun. Because they don't know, and by glob, they cannot figure it out. That's all of the questions that I'll be doing today. But some of you may have noticed the lovely footage I have going on here. This is video from my trips to and from Texas over the last few weeks. Some of it is just gorgeous, and I figured you could look at something other than me today. I do want to point out a few things, though. Many people tried to claim that it was barrel distortion that made the horizon appear curved in the video of my trip to Dallas. Yet the same phone is used on the way back from Dallas, so you'd think that there would be the same distortion. Yet on the way back there is no curve. What else was different? I would say that since the second plane went only 30,000 feet, and there were clouds within a couple thousand feet of us above and below the plane all the way out past the horizon, we never saw the true ground horizon, and were looking at the horizon of the clouds, and thus they were flat. It's the same camera. If the curve was caused by the camera, it would still be there with these higher clouds. Secondly, I tried to catch them whenever I could, but did you notice the crepuscular rays? When I was able to look at them with the camera pointed toward the sun, you can see that they converge, and people will say that that's evidence that the sun is close by. But when the plane moves along and I catch the rays from the side, you can see that they are parallel, meaning the convergence before was due to perspective, and the sun is really very far away. That's all I have for now. So remember, everyone, think critically.
That's my job. That's what I do. I don't lose. I win. I win. Is there no one on this planet to even challenge me?
Maybe you came by to congratulate me on last night's victory.